As we begin, I urge you to focus on every detail of this story, because what you are about to witness is not simply a narrative of betrayal and payback. It is a definitive lesson in what occurs when a narcissist misjudges the very person he casts aside. And I can guarantee you will never see the conclusion coming. The electronic lock chirped once, then reset. A new password was set. Clara Whitmore was standing in the entrance hall of the penthouse she had called home for 5 years, clutching a lone suitcase in one hand and her pregnant belly in the other. At 5 months along, the November rain slid down 52 floors of glass behind her. Mason Rowe stood 6 feet from her, adjusting his cufflink. Not agitated, not angry, simply adjusting a cufflink. A sterling silver Mont Blanc, the very set she had bought him the Christmas following their first FDA filing. His expression was the same one he wore when firing an incompetent contractor. A minor disruption, his mind already on the next item on his agenda. At this point, I need you to grasp something fundamental about this scene. This is not a man in turmoil. This is not a husband struggling with an agonizing choice. Mason Rowe had finalized this decision weeks ago. What you are observing is a staged act. The cufflink, the composed voice, the well-rehearsed lines. This is a man who has practiced this speech in a mirror, because for a narcissist, even cruelty requires a stylish delivery. The algorithm is finished, Clara. His voice was toneless, corporate and cold. The Series A funding round concludes on Thursday. 62 million. Rowe Diagnostics is on the verge of becoming the most valuable AI medical venture on the entire East Coast. He adjusted his sleeve. You engineered something phenomenal in that lab. I will not dispute that. But engineering a company is a far cry from engineering a product. Vanessa grasps the intricacies of capital networks, the dialect of investors. Her family's influence alone is worth more than your whole division. Clara did not utter a word. The baby stirred against her hand, and the child he paused, not the kind of pause born from difficulty, but the calculated pause of a surgeon just before making a pre-planned incision. Doctor, Feldstein's prenatal screening flagged a genetic abnormality. The risk is considerable. I have conferred with 3 specialists. He set a cashier's check down on the marble console. Take it. Settle in somewhere comfortable. Allow the lawyers to manage the rest. Clara's grip tightened on her belly. She felt an urge to scream. She wanted to ask if he recalled the night they saw the first positive pregnancy test. How he had hoisted her into the air in their cramped Astoria kitchen, twirling her around as he said, "We are going to be amazing parents, Clara. Our child is going to change the world." She yearned to ask what had become of that man, but she already knew the answer. That man had become rich, and becoming rich had only revealed the person he had been all along. And it is here that I must highlight something essential. Mason did not say our child. He said the child. 2 words that tell you all you need to know about his method for classifying people. Assets or liabilities, profit or loss. The baby in Clara's womb had just been recategorized from the future heir to a complete write-off, and he accomplished this with a bank check and a medical screening. Remember that screening. It will become significant later in ways Mason could never anticipate. The check sat on the dark stone, a pale rectangle. Clara didn't glance at the amount. She was certain it would be substantial enough to seem benevolent and meager enough to be an insult. That was Mason's trademark. The bedroom door opened. Vanessa Vance appeared in a silk robe, her dark hair still wet using Clara's towels, having used Clara's shampoo. Draped around her neck, catching the light as a small, intentional act of cruelty, was the sapphire anniversary pendant Mason had given Clara for their 5th wedding anniversary, the very one with their initials engraved on the back. Clara's gaze was fixed on the necklace. 10 years of friendship. Vanessa was the person who had hosted Clara's bridal shower. The one who had pulled her hair back during the first trimester's morning sickness. The one who had made a call every Sunday evening for a decade just to ask, "How is my girl 10 years?" And somewhere at a time, Clara still couldn't identify every one of those calls. Every brunch, every intimate, late-night conversation had been an intelligence-gathering operation. Vanessa had never been a friend. She had been a spy mapping the battlefield before the assault. Vanessa moved to Mason's side, entwining her arm with his. The motion was fluid, proprietary. "You did the hard part, Clara," Vanessa stated. Her voice held the unique, sugary quality of someone who has triumphed and wants you to be aware of it. The research, the long nights, the discovery. That requires a singular mind. But building what follows demands a different sort of individual. She tilted her head. I will look after him and the corporation. You should focus on your own well-being and the baby's naturally. Of course, I truly hope you consult a proper specialist about the baby's condition, Vanessa added. The concern in her tone was so perfectly manufactured that if Clara hadn't known better, and she certainly did know better now, about everything she might have thought it was sincere. Mason and I have discussed it, and we are both in agreement that your health must be the top priority at the moment, not the business. Mason and I discussed it. For how long had there been a Mason and I? Clara's mind raced. The business trip to London that was extended by 2 days. The conference in San Francisco where Vanessa just so happened to be present for a friend's wedding. The evening last spring when Vanessa had demanded she take Clara to dinner. You deserve a night out with the girls. You've been working too hard all while Mason supposedly remained at the office. Or, to be more precise, while Mason departed the office and drove to Vanessa's apartment in the village. Now consider this from a psychological angle. Vanessa is wearing Clara's anniversary gift, not her own accessories. Clara's. This is no mistake. This is a show of dominance. In the field of behavioral psychology, it is known as a dominance signal. Vanessa is not merely replacing Clara. She is erasing her, wearing her jewelry, using her bathroom, standing in her home. The statement is clear. Everything that belonged to you is now mine, and that includes the man. Clara observed them. The man she married in a Queen's courthouse when they were 24 and destitute, and the woman who had served as her maid of honor at that ceremony. And she felt a transformation within her, not of heartbreak. She had experienced heartbreak 3 weeks earlier when she uncovered the text exchanges, the hotel bills, the amended corporate documents that had quietly stricken her name from the list of founders. What she felt now was something icier and more functional. It was clarity. She lifted her suitcase. Then she reached past the check, ignoring it, and took the small USB drive from the ceramic bowl where they tossed their keys. Mason's eyes fixated on the motion. That has proprietary company information on it. It has my research notes, Clara stated, the first words she had spoken since his monologue had started. Personal methodology journals. Nothing that is the property of Roe Diagnostics. This was technically accurate in the same way a building's foundation is not considered part of the floors built upon it. She entered the elevator without a final look. The doors slid closed, framing Mason and Vanessa in the penthouse entryway like a magazine advertisement for a life constructed on stolen designs. The doorman Hector, who had known her for 5 years and had once assisted her with a broken centrifuge when the freight elevator was out of order, looked at her luggage. Can I summon a vehicle for you, Dr. Whitmore? To Penn Station, please. He hesitated. Is everything all right? Clara managed a smile. Everything is about to be Hector. Remember that sentence because Clara Whitmore meant every syllable of it. 1 week later, Clara was seated opposite Dr. Amara Osei in a walk-in clinic 14 miles from the city. The kind of establishment with fluorescent lighting and laminated health posters curling up at the edges. Dr. Osei placed a file down. Your amniocentesis results are perfect. No genetic issues, no raised markers, nothing remotely alarming. She leaned forward. Clara, whoever provided you with that previous report either made a colossal blunder or fabricated it completely. I have been in maternal fetal medicine for 23 years. These results do not lie. Clara looked down at the report. She had harbored her own doubts. She was a diagnostic scientist after all, and the initial report had contained discrepancies that would have troubled her even if they had concerned a stranger's child. There's a world of difference between suspicion and certainty. Suspicion lets you get by. Certainty makes you a threat. She held the report for what felt like an eternity while Dr. Owe gave her space. Through the clinic's window, a mother ambled by, pausing to adjust a blanket over her baby in a stroller. A perfectly normal everyday scene. But as Clara watched, something inside her shattered. This wasn't grief. It was something harder, sharper. It was pure rage. Not the explosive screaming kind, but a cold, steely resolve that settles deep in your bones and brings absolute focus. And this is where the narrative deviates from the familiar script. The typical story involves a total collapse, the betrayed wife breaking down, calling her mother, filing for divorce, battling over possessions, and taking years to heal. That was precisely what Mason anticipated. It was what Vanessa was banking on. It was what the $62 million legal team they had on standby was prepared for. But Clara was never typical. Clara was a scientist, and scientists don't merely react to problems, they systematically solve them. Mason hadn't just been unfaithful. He hadn't just stolen her company and given her job to her best friend. He had invented a lie about their unborn child to make his treachery seem justified. He had evaluated the life developing inside her and determined its worth as if running a diagnostic on a machine. Defective, not worth the upkeep, a write-off, and Vanessa had gone along with it. The same Vanessa who organized Clara's baby shower. The same Vanessa who just 3 months earlier had sat on Clara's sofa with a hand on her pregnant belly, saying, "I'm so excited to be Auntie V." That very woman helped forge a medical document labeling this child as damaged goods. Clara tucked the results away in her purse. "So what will you do now?" Dr. Owe asked gently. "I'm going to do what it takes to protect my daughter." "So you know it's a girl?" "I know." She rose to her feet, thanked the doctor, and stepped out into the muted suburban afternoon. Her entire worldly wealth consisted of $4,200 in a checking account. She had no job, no home, and no lawyer, while her husband commanded $62 million in capital and had a battalion of attorneys on call. By any logical measure, she was hopelessly outgunned, outmatched, and cornered. Mason, however, had made a single crucial error, the one that every thief eventually makes. He stole something from someone who understood its value far better than he ever could. 3 days later, at 2:47 in the morning, inside a 24-hour Newark diner called The Grind. The coffee was atrocious, the Wi-Fi secure. She was invisible to the other patrons, a trucker absorbed in a novel, a nursing student armed with highlighters, and a man in a creased suit who had the unmistakable air of a messy divorce. Utterly ignored, she opened her computer and keyed in a server address she had long since memorized. This wasn't the standard interface for the engineers at Road Diagnostics model, but a private back door she'd coded into the system 3 years ago, during those caffeine-drenched months when the algorithm was still her secret project developed in the spare bedroom of their Astoria apartment, well before Mason had even incorporated the business. She triggered a protocol she had designed but never used. She had named it failsafe. It was designed to run silently in the system's metadata, recording and timestamping every single modification made to the diagnostic algorithm and its clinical data. Every single adjustment, every manual override, every suppressed error report, failsafe would log it, encrypt it, and tuck it away in a hidden partition inaccessible without a 256-bit key that existed in only one place: Clara's mind. Now, the move Clara just made was extraordinary, and many people wouldn't grasp its brilliance. She didn't unleash a virus. She didn't crash the system. She didn't extract a single piece of data. She merely switched on a maintenance tool, a monitoring program she was fully entitled to create, given that she had built the entire platform from the ground up. It was the equivalent of a home's architect installing a hidden security camera in the foundation before handing the keys to the new owners. Entirely legal, completely undetectable, and absolutely catastrophic if those owners ever decide to pull up the floorboards. She then dialed a number. A voice from Margaret Chen's office answered at 3:15 a.m. "Margaret, it's Clara Whitmore. I need to get a provisional patent filed tonight." "How provisional?" "Fully documented. Original methodology, complete development, logs, the architectural blueprints. All of it predates the incorporation of Road Diagnostics by 14 months. File it under my maiden name, Clara Sterling. Assign ownership to a blind trust with my unborn daughter as the sole beneficiary." There was a long silence. "Clara, are you certain about this?" "I have never been more certain of anything." She snapped her laptop shut, down the last of the wretched coffee, and disappeared into the Newark night. Miles away in Tribeca, Mason Rowe was sleeping soundly next to Vanessa Vance, dreaming of Series A funding, completely unaware that the legal foundation of his entire empire had just been transferred to a baby who wasn't even born yet. Take a moment and let that sink in. At 3 in the morning in an all-night cafe, a pregnant woman with $4,000 to her name just legally affirmed that a child who doesn't exist yet is the rightful owner of what is destined to become a $2 billion corporation. Mason Rowe is poised to spend the next 6 years erecting an empire on land he does not own. And he doesn't have a clue. This isn't revenge. Not yet. This is preparation. The vengeance comes later, and it will be a masterpiece. 6 years on the Sterling Institute for Computational Medicine stood on a Palo Alto hillside, a striking structure of white concrete, glass, and living green walls. Inside the sunlit atrium, a 6-year-old girl named Maya Sterling was on her stomach on the terrazzo floor, drawing a dinosaur in a lab coat. "Mama, do T-Rexes have elbows?" Clara looked up from a peer review. "They have very tiny elbows, which is why they were so bad at push-ups." Maya giggled. Dr. Pham says they had feathers. Dr. Pham is both correct and terrifying. 6 years had changed Clara in ways that were more than skin deep beyond the streak of silver at her temple, or the quiet command she now brought into every room. The first year had almost shattered her. A 200-square-foot studio in San Jose, a newborn who cried incessantly, a bank balance that was perpetually insufficient. She endured it the way a scientist does by breaking an insurmountable challenge into a series of smaller, manageable tasks. Feed the baby, write the patent application. Feed the baby, apply for the Stanford Fellowship. Feed the baby, and ignore the Google alert announcing that Mason Rowe had just secured a $100 million funding round and was being hailed by Wired magazine as the visionary CEO revolutionizing medical diagnostics. The Stanford position was offered when Maya was 4 months old. Within 18 months, Clara had authored 2 papers that redefined her field. Within 3 years, she had her own institute. Within 5, she became the person you called to determine if a new medical AI was brilliant or a disaster waiting to happen. Maya was raised in that lab the way other kids are raised in family kitchens. She could draw molecules before she could spell her own name. She called the mass spectrometer the Big Beep, and she had named the main server rack Harold. She never once asked about her father. Clara had mentally rehearsed the answer 1,000 times in the shower on her commute, during the sleepless hours between 2 and 4 a.m. But Maya, with the unique wisdom of a child who has always been unconditionally loved, seemed to know their family was already complete. The Institute's glass doors slid open. Maya looked up her internal radar for important people pinging. Julian. She dropped her dinosaur drawing and shot across the atrium. Julian Aster caught her in midair, swinging her onto his hip with the effortless grace of long practice. He was tall and dark-haired, dressed with the quiet confidence of a man who never had to signal his wealth. A navy blazer, no tie, and shoes that likely cost more than a month's rent, but looked as comfortable as if he wore them to walk his dog. The Aster family had been building America for 4 generations. Railroad, steel, and more recently, biotech. Julian was passionate about biotech, which led him to Clara's research 3 years ago, after a paper she'd published on algorithmic bias in cancer screening kept him reading until 4 in the morning. He called her the next day not with an offer to acquire her work, but to fund it. No conditions, no board seat, just the capital she needed, and the quiet conviction that the greatest investment he could ever make was to empower a brilliant mind and get out of its way. I want to emphasize this point because the contrast is critical. Mason Rowe saw Clara's brilliance and thought, how can I exploit this? Julian Aster saw her brilliance and thought, how can I enable this? It was the same woman, the same talent, but 2 fundamentally different mindsets. That single distinction was all you needed to know about their true characters. The rest unfolded gradually. Coffee meetings stretched into 3-hour sessions, a mutual outrage over the state of pediatric medicine. The afternoon he arrived unannounced simply because Maya had drawn him a whale, and he felt compelled to thank her face to face. The evening, Clara broke down in his car, but not over Mason. She had moved past tears for Mason years ago. This was about a difficult patient case, and Julian simply sat with her in silence, offering tissues until she composed herself. He helped Maya get settled, then set a gold-embossed folder on Clara's desk. The cover announced Rowe Diagnostics, a proposed merger with Astro Biotech Holdings, valuation $5 billion. Clara's eyes fell on the names. Mason Rowe, CEO, Vanessa COO. Their people claim their AI diagnostic platform is without peer, Julian said. A flawless clinical history poised for a worldwide rollout. They're asking for $5 billion, he paused. I need an outside audit director to head up the due diligence, someone capable of assessing the core technology down to the source code. He met her gaze directly. There is precisely one individual on this planet with the qualifications for that. Clara's fingers brushed the folder. Her mind went back to the last time she saw Mason's name on a formal document, a divorce decree she signed while 8 months pregnant, staying in a borrowed Jersey City apartment. She opened the folder, absorbed the executive summary, and snapped it shut. A small, utterly cold smile touched her lips. Inform them I will personally lead the review. Julian reached for Maya's dinosaur drawing. This one is wearing a stethoscope. Is she a dinosaur doctor? She is a surgeon dinosaur, Maya clarified. She operates on the triceratops that are unwell. Of course she does, Julian remarked, slipping the artwork into his blazer pocket. Now the sequence of events that comes next is among the most gratifying I have ever encountered in such a narrative. This is because Clara isn't about to start shouting at Mason. She has no intention of hurling accusations. Instead, she will do something infinitely more destructive. She will maintain absolute professionalism. The Aster Biotech boardroom on Park Avenue accommodated 20 people around a monolithic slab of Italian walnut. Its windows framed a Manhattan panorama that, with a glance south and east, revealed the Tribeca Tower she once called home. She kept her eyes averted. The delegation from Rowe Diagnostics entered at 9:58 a.m. Mason came in first, appearing older, with his hair now completely silver, but just as commanding, though a new tension in his jaw suggested either pressure or in cosmetic work. Following him was Vanessa, adorned in a white Chanel suit and earrings, Clara mentally valued at $15,000. Behind them came 4 lawyers, 2 finance executives, and a public relations specialist. Mason's gaze scanned the room, his typical process of identifying potential threats. When his eyes finally settled on the woman in a charcoal suit at the far end of the table, examining documents with the serene concentration of a surgeon post-op, he went completely still. His Mont Blanc pen escaped his grip and clattered against the walnut table. The noise was startlingly loud. Vanessa's response was more delayed but far more telling. Her smile didn't vanish. It simply froze like a computer screen just as the system crashes. "Good morning," Clara stated, her voice pleasant, businesslike, and completely detached the voice of a total stranger. She remained seated. "Please find your seats. We have a substantial agenda to address." There was no "Hello, Mason." There was no "It has certainly been a while." She gave no indication that she saw the ring on the woman opposite her, a piece of jewelry, likely financed by an algorithm Clara herself had developed on a used computer in Queens. She activated her tablet and began. For a man whose entire sense of self was predicated on being the most powerful individual in any space, being regarded as a non-entity by the woman he had cast off was a uniquely shattering experience. Clara could see it corroding him like acid on steel. A slow internal decay. "Miss Vance, please begin by outlining the algorithm's diagnostic methodology, commencing with the Level 4 biometric data integration." Vanessa rose and began her polished, pre-scripted presentation. The slides were slick. The terminology was advanced, but her actual comprehension was paper-thin. 15 minutes in, Clara interrupted. "Your validation report cites a 99.8% accuracy rate. Can you clarify how the compensation algorithm addresses false negative variances in Level 4 biometric data? To be specific, how does the system distinguish between a true negative and a simple data artifact during initial oncological screenings?" Vanessa's smile stayed in place, but her eyes went vacant. "The procedure is explained in Appendix C. I have examined Appendix C. It outlines the inputs and outputs. I am asking about the algorithm's decision process." A heavy silence descended. Vanessa glanced at Mason. Mason stared at the table. This was the precise moment the entire power structure in the room inverted because Vanessa could not answer the question. She couldn't answer because she wasn't the one who created the algorithm. Clara was. Vanessa was a woman posturing with someone else's genius, and Clara had just asked her to detail the stitching of her own outfit. Perhaps Mason cut in, leaning forward with his practiced investor relations charm. "We can get into the specifics at a later time. Julian, surely you recognize the need to guard our proprietary methods. Just between us professionals." One single tap. Julian's index finger touched the walnut table, a movement as light as a conductor's baton. "Mr. Rowe," Julian's voice was low with the quiet intensity of deep water. "It appears you may be unacquainted with Aster Biotech's protocols. In this setting, all judgments on scientific validity fall to Dr. Sterling. Her determination is absolute. If your team cannot meet her criteria, your $5 billion proposal is nothing more than $5 billion of worthless paper." Mason's jaw clenched. Vanessa resumed her seat. What came next was 3 hours of systematic deconstruction. Clara dissected Rowe's documentation piece by piece, unhurried and betraying no emotion, posing each query with the detached, polite interest of a professor grading a subpar thesis. "The patient group for your FD, a Phase 2 trial, consisted of 2,400 subjects. While your report gives a demographic summary, when I compare the enrollment periods to your stated site capacities, the figures are inconsistent. Either your Denver facility processed 300 patients in a 2-week period, which would be a global record, or those subjects never existed." Mason shifted uneasily in his seat. An administrative overlap. The tracking software for enrollment had a formatting glitch. A formatting glitch that just happened to inflate your sample size by 12%. Clara jotted a note. Let's continue. Your profit forecasts are built on expansion into 17 countries within 2 years, but your regulatory papers confirm only FDA approval. There is no CE mark for Europe, no PMDA clearance for Japan. How do you plan to enter markets where you lack official regulatory consent? One of Mason's lawyers whispered into his ear. Mason gave a slight nod. Those applications are in process. According to your own documentation, Clara said, flipping to a new page, they have been in process for 3 years. She looked up. Is there a particular reason the European Medicines Agency has withheld approval for your device, Mr. Rowe? The question filled the silent room. Clara was already confident she knew the answer. The EMA had surely flagged the same calibration deficiencies she had, but she wanted to hear Mason admit it. Or more accurately, she wanted him to fail to admit it in front of 30 people who were deciding whether to sign a $5 billion check. Mason's chief counsel interjected. Dr. Sterling, I feel we are moving into an area that would require— I have one final question, Clara stated, her voice containing just enough of an edge to slice through his interruption. She refocused her attention on Vanessa. Miss Vance, your own technical summary describes a proprietary neural network architecture as the primary innovation. Could you outline it? I don't mean the marketing points. I mean the actual design. The number of layers, your activation functions, the training protocols. Vanessa's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. The architecture is proprietary. So you want us to hand over $5 billion for a trade secret you are unable to explain. Clara turned to Julian. I believe our work here today is done. It was, as Mason would come to understand much later, the most profoundly violent act ever directed at him. Not because Clara had been hostile. She had not. It was because she had been entirely equitable, consummately professional, and utterly ruinous. And he could not object to a single part of it without revealing his own ignorance about his company's product. 3 weeks later, Mason found himself sitting in a rented sedan across the street from Maya's Montessori school in Palo Alto. He touched down in California in his personal Gulfstream G650, the jet he'd acquired the year his company Road Diagnostics hit the 10-figure mark. The one Vanessa had dubbed the Closer because Mason would fly investors out on it, and the rarefied air in its plush leather seats usually sealed the deal before he even spoke. The private investigator's dossier rested on his lap. 18 pages. Subject Maya Sterling, age 6, born in San Jose. Maternal parent Clara Sterling, née Whitmore. Paternal parent unlisted. Emergency contacts listed Clara Sterling first with a secondary of Julian Aster. That last name struck him with the force of a physical blow. Julian Aster legacy wealth, the kind of generational fortune that made Mason's new money feel like pocket change. The file contained a photographed Julian at a farmer's market with Maya perched on his shoulders, both of them caught mid-laugh. Maya's small hand was woven into Julian's hair with the casual ownership of a child who has only ever known safety. Mason found himself staring at the image far longer than necessary, not because of jealousy. Mason didn't process jealousy like other men as an ache of want or loss. For him, it was a simple market correction. An asset that belonged in his column was currently in someone else's ledger. Julian Aster was playing father to his daughter. Julian Aster was bankrolling his ex-wife's new venture. Julian Aster was capitalizing on a situation Mason himself had engineered and should by all rights be controlling. He turned the page to another photo. Maya smiling with a gap in her teeth. Her eyes the same slate green shade that he saw in his own reflection each morning. A feeling stirred in his gut, not love, not remorse, but something far more practical. This girl was a lever. He was on the phone with his lawyer before his car had even pulled away from the curb. And right here the narrative veers into its most treacherous ground. Because Mason is preparing to do something family courts witness constantly, but seldom with such raw transparency. He is about to turn fatherhood into a weapon. He doesn't desire the child. He desires what she represents, a pressure point. A method to coerce Clara's signature on a $5 billion acquisition. He was preparing to deploy a 6-year-old girl with the same detached utility he used his Gulfstream jet as an instrument to close a deal. The tea shop on Clement Street featured a collection of eclectic chairs, a menu scrawled on a chalkboard, and a cat dozing on a stack of newspapers in the window. Clara was there first. Mason made his entrance 4 minutes late. He slid a manila envelope onto the table. It held photographs of Maya at her school. Maya on a swing at the park. Maya with an ice cream cone on Julian's terrace, the Bay Bridge arching behind her. "She has my eyes," Mason stated. Clara ignored the envelope completely. She raised her cup with a steady hand, sipped, and placed it back on its saucer. "Why are you here, Mason?" "To start with, I want an explanation. You were pregnant when you walked out. You had the baby, my baby, and you didn't say a word. You told me it was defective." Clara's tone was perfectly level. "You presented me with a fabricated medical file and a check telling me to handle it. That was your exact phrase, handle it." The pressure was immense, the funding round the entire board. "You were in bed with my best friend while you were stealing my life's work. Pressure is a charitable description for what you were feeling." Mason's jaw tightened. He recalibrated the way he always did when a negotiation started to slip from his grasp. He leaned back in his chair, his expression softening as he sought a new line of attack. The predatory grin returned, the one that had charmed venture capitalists and unnerved rivals. The one she had for a time confused with real confidence. "What's in the past is irrelevant, Clara. We need to be pragmatic about what comes next." He tapped the envelope. "I need your signature on the merger, a clean audit. The deal has to close by Friday. And if I refuse, then on Monday my legal team files a petition for full custody. We'll claim concealment of paternity, parental alienation. I have resources you can't even imagine. I'll drown you in litigation. From the same father who labeled that child a genetic liability and tried to pay for her to simply disappear. Try to prove it. You signed a comprehensive non-disclosure. Vanessa witnessed it." He settled back confident. "I don't actually want the child. I want the deal. Sign the documents and Maya's life continues as it is. Oppose me and I will take everything from you all over again." Clara simply watched him. A strange thought crossed her mind. How had the most brilliant man she had ever known managed to become so profoundly stupid? It wasn't that his intellect had faded. Mason was still a genius. But 6 years of sycophants agreeing with his every word had made him forget the possibility of being wrong. "You're threatening to use our daughter as a bargaining chip," she said, "to compel me to approve a medical device I am certain is dangerously flawed. I'm providing a practical path forward." "Answer me this, Mason." Clara set down her cup. "That evening in the penthouse when you gave me that prenatal report, did you ever bother to read it? The one Vanessa brought to you? Or did you just take her word for it?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed his features. Clara saw it instantly. He hadn't read a single word. He'd accepted Vanessa's version of the truth just as he accepted the word of anyone who told him exactly what he wanted to hear. "Because this is what I find so fascinating," Clara went on. "You constructed a $2 billion company based on a diagnostic algorithm. Your entire product is engineered to see the things everyone else misses. Yet you completely failed to detect that the woman sharing your bed had forged a medical document concerning your own child." She let the words hang in the air. "That's not just irony, Mason. That was a warning sign you ignored." Mason's expression hardened into a mask. "Are you signing the papers or not?" Clara stood, leaving 2 quarters on the table for her tea. At the door, she glanced back at him. "You have spent 6 years convincing yourself that you understand power. You don't. You understand force, which is an entirely different animal. Force is brutish and loud and shatters everything it comes into contact with, including the one who wields it." She paused. "True power is patient, it's quiet, and it never ever has to announce its own name." She walked out, leaving Mason alone with the mismatched furniture and the sleeping cat. And he was left in a silence that felt, for reasons he could not articulate, like the dead calm just before a hurricane. That night, Julian was on the living room floor of their Pacific Heights home. Maya settled in his lap, reading The Paper-Bag Princess for the 101st time. By the 6th page, Maya's eyelids were heavy, her head resting against his chest as one small hand clutched his sleeve with the absolute unthinking faith children place in those who have proven worthy of it. He carried her up to her room. When he returned, Clara was at the kitchen table, her face illuminated by the laptop's cool glow. "He used Maya against you," Julian stated, not as a question. "He's filing for custody to force my approval on the merger." Julian took a seat opposite her. His face was perfectly still, a sign of profound rage. Julian's anger was like the deep ocean, placid on the surface, but with enough pressure below to implode a submarine. "Walk me through it all," he said. So Clara told him everything: the meeting, the pictures, the final demand. Julian listened with a focused stillness, which was one of the many things she cherished about him. It wasn't an absence of opinion. He just knew the vital difference between hearing someone and simply waiting for your own turn to speak. When she was done, he was silent for a long moment. So he's unaware of the patent? No. Or the failsafe? No. And the trust, Maya's trust, completely off his radar. Mason never checked. That is Mason's core flaw. Clara said, her voice unshaken, though Julian saw her hands gripping the table's edge. He believes that once he takes something from you, it remains his forever. It never enters his mind that the person he robbed might have been several moves ahead of him the entire time. Julian reached out his hand, covering hers. Are you okay? He used her pictures. Julian, he sat there and fanned out photographs of my daughter across the table like poker chips, then told me he would take her from me if I didn't comply. Her voice didn't crack, but it was close. She's 6 years old. She loves drawing dinosaurs wearing stethoscopes. She named our main server Harold, and he looked at a photo of her and saw a negotiation tactic. He is not going to get near her. Julian's voice was quiet and unconditional. Not now, not ever. Clara looked up at him. I know, because of what I'm about to show you. She typed in 64 hexadecimal characters memorized, never recorded and watched, as 6 years of dormant data came to life. The failsafe protocol. Every single change Mason's team had implemented in the algorithm since her departure. Every manual override, every concealed error flag, all logged, time-stamped, and encrypted, hidden in plain sight. She started to read. What she discovered was far worse than she had ever imagined. The algorithm she had created was meant to detect early-stage cancer, to find the subtle markers that human specialists might overlook. But Mason's version had been corrupted. The calibration data was tweaked to produce accurate results in controlled testing, all while concealing a fatal error. The actual false negative rate for early-stage cancer screenings wasn't the 0.2% his company claimed. The real figure was closer to 8%. Clara scrolled through the system logs. Each line item was a timestamp and a record of change. December 14th, 2019. Calibration threshold adjusted from 73 to 0.81 by user Vance. January 3rd, 2020. Error report number 847 was flagged by the automated quality check, then manually overwritten by user MRO. March 18th, 2020. Patient cohort data was altered. The original sample was removed. A replacement sample was inserted by user Vance. It went on for page after page, year after year, a methodical, deliberate campaign to make a defective product appear functional. And behind every manipulated number, there was a real person. A woman in Denver who was informed her mammogram was clear. A man in Atlanta whose lung scan showed nothing. A teenager in Boston whose blood work came back completely normal. They all walked out of those clinics convinced they were healthy because a machine Mason Rowe was marketing as perfect had examined their data and lied. This was no longer just a story about an unfaithful husband. This was the story of a man who, in his hunger for wealth, permitted a medical device to deceive cancer patients. 1 in 12 early-stage cancers were missed, affecting thousands of patients. Some of them discovered it later, when treatment became harder, more agonizing, and less likely to succeed. And some of them, to be perfectly honest, were probably already gone. Mason Rowe hadn't only betrayed his wife, he had betrayed every single patient who entrusted his product with their very life. How bad is it? Julian asked. Clara swiveled the laptop toward him. He read for 30 seconds. His expression was unchanged, but his hand on the table slowly tightened into a fist. Falsified clinical trials. Thousands of compromised results. Federal-level fraud. When do you want to make your move? Friday at the signing. I want him cornered in a room full of lawyers with no escape. Sagaponak, Julian said, referring to the family estate. I'll set it up. Julian, yes, he threatened our daughter. Clara said our without a second thought, and neither of them corrected it because for a long time it had been true. He had looked at her photograph and seen only a bargaining chip. I need you to understand that what's happening on Friday isn't just about the company, the patent, or the fraud. It's about making certain he never has the power to threaten her again. Julian nodded. Then we make sure it's permanent. Clara closed the laptop and went to check on her daughter. Maya was asleep on her side, an arm wrapped around a plush elephant named Professor Trunks, her dark hair fanned out across the pillow. Clara stood in the doorway, just watching her breathe. In, out, the simplest and most fundamental rhythm in the universe. I built every bit of this for you, she thought. The institute, the patent, the trust, this whole life, all of it, was so that no one could ever look at you and see a problem that needed solving. So that you would always, always be seen for what you are, which is everything. She drew the door halfway shut, she leaving a thin line of hallway light on the carpet just the way Maya liked, and went to bed. What you are about to witness is the final act. And I urge you to prepare yourself because everything Clara has done for 6 years, every quiet maneuver, every calculated risk, every sleepless night in that studio apartment in San Jose, has all been leading to this very room on this specific morning at this table. The Aster estate in Sagaponack was situated on 12 acres of oceanfront land at the tip of Long Island. The main residence was a century-old stone manor, the kind of property that was priceless because it had never been offered for sale. The great room featured floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Atlantic, which on this December morning was the color of dark steel. 30 people sat around a mahogany table. Investment bankers, corporate lawyers, financial officers, regulatory specialists. Their combined hourly billing rate was roughly $47,000. Every last person at that table was expecting to walk out of that room richer than when they had entered. Mason arrived at 10 o'clock sharp with Vanessa half a pace behind him. He wore a custom three-piece suit, and his expression was the exact one Clara remembered from their wedding day. It wasn't love, it was triumph. The look of a man who had secured exactly what he wanted. Vanessa was in white Valentino, her blonde hair swept up her diamond earrings, catching the cold December light. She assessed the room the way a real estate agent assesses a property she has already sold in her head. They came with an entourage, 4 attorneys from a firm that billed $2,000 an hour, a chief financial officer poached from Goldman Sachs, and a PR consultant who was already composing the press release on her laptop. They settled themselves around the table with the smooth choreography of people who had done this many times before. Mason pulled his chair in and glanced around. He acknowledged Julian with a nod, just familiar enough to imply they were equals. He acknowledged Clara with a nod, just dismissive enough to imply she was part of the staff. Then he slid a leather-bound contract across the table with a Mont Blanc pen. Dr. Sterling, your signature on the certification page, and we can all raise a glass to the future of medical innovation. He smiled at the room. I believe champagne has been arranged. Indeed it had. 2 cases of 2008 Dom Perignon sat on a side table near the windows, a detail Clara noticed, and filed away. Mason had ordered champagne before the deal was even finalized. That was the essence of him. A man so sure of his victory that he organized the celebration before the game was won. The very certainty that had made him a billionaire was about to be his undoing. Clara looked at the pen. She looked at Mason. She looked at the 30 people awaiting their commissions. She did not pick up the pen. She tapped a key on her tablet. The screen behind Julian flickered to life. It was not a contract. It was a cascade of red flag data scrolling under a header: unauthorized commercial deployment. Severe compliance breach. Every sound in the room died. Even the ocean outside, it seemed to be holding its breath. Clara stood. As independent audit director, I am formally vetoing this merger and recommending its immediate cancellation. Her voice was even clear and completely devoid of emotion. Roe Diagnostics does not own the core algorithm it is attempting to sell. The technology was developed by me independently before the company's incorporation and was legally transferred into a blind trust 6 years ago. Mason's hand reaching for his water glass froze in midair. Furthermore, I have discovered systematic falsification of clinical trial data spanning the company's entire 6-year history. The actual false negative rate for early-stage cancer screening is not 2%. It is approximately 8%. For 6 years, this device has been telling cancer patients that they are healthy. The data was deliberately altered. Mason was on his feet, his chair having toppled over behind him. This is slander. This is sabotage. You signed a release. You waived all claims 6 years ago. Vanessa was right there. She witnessed every document. Mason, Vanessa's voice was sharp, a clear warning. Mason ignored her. He turned toward Julian, switching tactics the way he always did when the ground beneath him shifted. Find the true power in the room. Make an appeal. Julian, listen to me. This woman has a personal vendetta. She's my ex-wife, for God's sake. You cannot let a scorned woman with a score to settle torpedo a $5 billion deal. Mr. Rowe, Julian did not raise his voice. He had no need to. Sit down. Mason did not sit. His face was flushed, his breathing rapid. He pointed a finger at Clara. She stole proprietary data from my company. That USB drive she took the night she left. She had no claim to company property. Whatever she is showing you is fruit of a poisoned tree. Clara said nothing. She didn't have to. She simply turned to face Patricia Hargrove. Julian's lead counsel, silver-haired with 31 years of federal IP law experience, rose from her chair. She placed a leather portfolio on the table that bore the red seal of the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. The room grew utterly silent, the way courtrooms fall silent just before a verdict is read. Mr. Rowe, Patricia's voice had the warmth of a final right. Let me address your concerns in order. First, Dr. Sterling did not steal proprietary data. That USB drive contained her personal research journals, which are not defined as corporate property under New York intellectual property law. Second, and more importantly, she opened the portfolio. The divorce settlement your client signed pertained only to the equity shares in Rowe Diagnostics as a corporate entity. That settlement was void. It was legally impossible to transfer intellectual property rights, which had already been placed in a third-party trust 12 hours before the document was even signed. She pushed the portfolio toward Mason. He stared at it, but kept his hands back as if the paper itself might be toxic. The trust's one and only beneficiary is Maya Sterling, age 6. Because she is a minor, all commercial activity related to the trust's assets required the written permission of her legal guardian, Dr. Clara Sterling. Permission you never sought and never received. She paused, letting the weight of her words fill the silence. Every commercial use of this algorithm over the past 6 years, every single hospital contract, every insurance partnership, every device you shipped, and every clinical trial that was funded constitutes an act of federal intellectual property theft under the Defend Trade Secrets Act. That law carries penalties of up to $5 million per infringement, or 3 times the value of the stolen IP, whichever is higher. She snapped the portfolio shut. By my initial calculations, Mr. Rowe, you are currently liable for approximately $6 billion in statutory damages, which I should note is more than the total worth of your company. A dead silence fell over the room. Outside, the Atlantic crashed against the coastline with the ancient indifference of an ocean that had watched empires rise and crumble. One of Mason's lawyers, the most senior partner, a man named Caldwell, who charged $3,000 an hour and had never lost a case that mattered, calmly set his pen down. His gaze shifted from Mason to the portfolio and finally toward the door. Clara watched him do the kind of mental arithmetic every lawyer eventually confronts. Is this client worth destroying my reputation over? Caldwell's conclusion was evident in the way he leaned back, creating a physical distance from the table. Clara continued. 15 minutes before we began, our failsafe protocol automatically delivered the entire unredacted archive of falsified clinical data to the FDA and the SEC. A federal investigation is already active. Then the phones began to go off, all of them, a sudden cacophony of vibrations and ringtones as lawyers and bankers received simultaneous alerts. On a financial ticker in the corner, the stock for Rowe Diagnostics started to collapse. 12%, then 20, then 40. The numbers tumbled downwards with the mechanical finality of a guillotine. Mason's eyes were fixed on the screen, his face turning the color of ash. His hands, the same hands that had coolly adjusted his cufflinks 6 years ago, were now shaking. Vanessa stood up. She turned to face Mason, her expression stripped of every veneer of partnership or affection, revealing the truth that had always been there. They were two predators who hunted as a pair only when the hunting was easy. This is your mess, she said, her voice no longer sweet or refined. You promised me the intellectual property was clean. You told me she signed away all her rights. I will not go to jail because you were too incompetent to handle a divorce. She glanced around the room at the attorneys, who refused to meet her gaze, at Julian, who observed it all with the detachment of an engineer watching a controlled demolition, and seemed to finally grasp she had no allies, no escape route, and no one to call for help. You want to know this most pathetic part, she said to Mason. She warned you 6 years ago. She held up that thumb drive right in front of your face, and you were too arrogant to even question what was on it. She walked out, her heels clicking on the hardwood like a countdown timer. And that was it, the moment the whole empire crumbled. Not with a bang, but with a countdown. Vanessa's heels on the floor, 30 phones ringing in unison, and a stock ticker falling like a stone tossed into a deep well. For 6 years, Mason Rose had built a kingdom on stolen blueprints. and the architect had just arrived to demand payment. Mason looked around the table at 30 different faces. Not a single one offered him salvation. His legal team was on their phones. His bankers were closing their laptops. His public relations consultant had already slipped out of the room unnoticed. His eyes landed on Clara last. In that look, the helpless gaze of a man who just discovered the ground beneath his feet was never solid. Clara saw what she needed to see. It wasn't victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was recognition. He finally recognized what he had thrown away. Clara closed her tablet. She didn't say, "I warned you." She didn't say, "You have only yourself to blame." She said nothing at all to Mason Rowe because he was no longer a person she needed to address. He was a problem she had just solved. She stood and walked to the door with Julian Rose right behind her. Mason Rowe stayed at the mahogany table. The champagne on the side table sat untouched. His lawyers were still on their phones, their voices tight with the unique urgency of professionals calculating how fast they could sever ties with a client who had just become radioactive. His chief financial officer had already vanished, laptop under his arm, head bowed, speaking rapidly into his own phone. Mason sat perfectly still. His hands were flat on the table, but there were no more strategies to formulate. The spreadsheets would never balance. The projections led to nowhere. Everything he had built for 6 years, the offices, the contracts, the magazine covers, the TED Talk, the penthouse, the art collection, the reputation, all of it was built on a foundation he never had the right to build on. And the cruelest part, the detail Clara had never planned, but which the universe had delivered with its own bitter justice, was that the one thing that might have saved him was Maya. Had he been a father to her, had he not cast her aside like a flawed product, had he simply wanted her, Clara might never have had to protect her this way. The trust was created from love, not from a desire for revenge, but it had ultimately become an instrument of both. Outside, the December sunlight was sharp and clear, and the estate's lawn stretched out toward the ocean. Maya was on the south lawn in a red coat and a massive, crookedly hand-knitted scarf, a present she had made for Julian that he insisted she keep. She was playing fetch with a golden retriever named Copernicus, who belonged to the groundskeeper, but had adopted Maya as his own personal mission. She saw them and ran toward them. Mama Julian Copernicus caught it in the air. Julian caught her, hoisting her onto his hip while pulling Clara in with his free arm. The three of them stood there in the cold, salty air. The billionaire, the scientist, and the 6-year-old who owned an empire she didn't know existed and wouldn't care about if she did. Because what was important to Maya Sterling was that the people she loved were here with her now. And the dog was bringing the ball back. "Are you finished with your meeting?" Maya asked. "We are," Clara said. "Was it boring?" Clara looked at Julian. Julian looked back at Clara. An unspoken message passed between them. "Parts of it were very interesting," Julian said. "Can we get hot chocolate?" "We can absolutely get hot chocolate." Clara pressed her face against Julian's shoulder and breathed in. Behind them, through the stone walls, came the muffled noises of a world falling apart. Raised voices, slamming laptops, the chaos that erupts when a lie finally dies. She thought of Hector, the doorman, 6 years ago. "Is everything all right?" And her answer, "Everything is about to be." She had been telling the truth. A helicopter with the Aster family crest lifted off from the estate's helipad and banked east into the open sky. Below it, on a screen that no one at Rowe Diagnostics could tear their eyes from, the numbers kept falling. 6 months after the Sagaponack meeting, the Wall Street Journal ran a story on its front page. The headline read, "Rowe Diagnostics CEO indicted on 47 counts of federal fraud." The article detailed falsified clinical trials, compromised patient diagnostics, and a 6-year cover-up that had potentially harmed thousands of cancer patients across the nation. Mason Rose's bail was set at $50 million. Vanessa Vance, who was named as a co-conspirator, had turned state's witness for a reduced sentence, giving testimony that implicated Mason in every key decision to alter the data. The partnership that was built on betrayal concluded the way such partnerships always do, with each person trying to survive at the other's expense. Rowe Diagnostics stock was delisted from the NASDAQ. The company's assets were frozen. The penthouse in Tribeca was seized. The Gulfstream was grounded. The art collection, the cars, the vineyard in Napa, all of it was liquidated to cover legal fees and settlement funds. A class action lawsuit on behalf of 4,200 patients was filed in federal court. The lead plaintiff was a 38-year-old kindergarten teacher from Denver named Maria Santos, whose early-stage breast cancer had been missed by a Rowe Diagnostics device 2 years before. By the time a different doctor found it, the cancer had advanced to stage 3. She survived. Not everyone was so lucky. Clara paid no mind to the trial, her focus entirely elsewhere. The Sterling Institute was growing. That spring saw the opening of a new wing bankrolled by the Aster Foundation and dedicated to open-source medical AI. Its algorithms were all publicly auditable, its data sets fully transparent, and every bit of its code was available for peer review. Engraved in the glass above the doorway was a quote Clara had personally selected. "The most profound diagnosis is always the truth." Maya entered the first grade, her passion for drawing dinosaurs still strong, though now they were rendered with greater anatomical correctness. Dr. Pham's birthday gift of a paleontology book meant she now insisted every one of her T-Rex drawings had feathers. To her, the mass spectrometer was still the big beep. The question about her father remained unasked, though Clara knew it was only a matter of time. And when that moment arrived, Clara would give her the whole truth, every last piece of it. That was what separated her from Mason. She was convinced her daughter had a right to the truth, no matter how difficult it might be. Julian proposed to Clara on a Tuesday afternoon. It was in the Institute's atrium while Maya was at school, and the lab had fallen silent. There was no getting down on one knee. He presented no ring. He just looked at her and said, "I want to share the rest of my life with you and Maya if you'll let me." Clara's answer was yes. When Maya was told the news, she asked, "Does this mean Copernicus is my dog for real now?" Julian confirmed that he was. At 6 years old, Maya pronounced it the best day of her entire life, and she was probably right. The wedding was an intimate gathering of 12 people. Dr. Owe attended, as did Margaret Chen, Dr. Fan, and Hector the doorman from her Tribeca apartment, who wept during their vows and blamed it on his allergies. Maya served as the flower girl. She was dressed in a white gown and sneakers, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers she'd gathered from the Institute's garden, along with a lone dinosaur toy she set on the altar for good fortune. Clara opted for an unadorned dress without the sapphire pendant. She no longer had a use for it. She possessed everything she truly needed, all of which she had built on her own. There are betrayals so total they feel designed to annihilate you. They strip you of your work, your faith in others, your home, and the very future you were creating, leaving you on a rainy street with a suitcase and a pulse you're not even sure you want. But that door slamming shut behind you isn't always a final chapter. Sometimes it becomes the foundation of something you never knew you were meant to construct. The deepest revenge isn't about ruin. It's not about witnessing your enemies crumble, though there is a definite human satisfaction in that for which no one needs to apologize. The ultimate revenge is building a life so full of meaning, so driven by purpose, and so completely yours that the very people who tried to erase you must live forever with the knowledge that the only thing they ever truly destroyed was their own chance to be a part of it. She didn't want revenge. She just wanted the truth, and the truth handled the rest. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. If you found this story compelling, please tap the like button and subscribe. A fresh story appears each day, every one more moving than the one before. I'll see you in the next one.